Hello, story seekers. I'm Ben.
I'm Nico, and you're listening to the Tiny Bookcase.
Welcome to this Write-like episode.
As you know, in these episodes we talk about famous and infamous writers while tackling prompts in their honour.
Style, structure, tone. We intend to see what happens when we borrow from the greats.
Our writer today was a German-American poet, novelist, and short story writer.
Later in life, he stated in an interview that each line must have its own power, its own feeling, its own juice, its own flavour. Writing must never be boring. We're talking about Charles Bukowski. Or I think his full name is Henry Charles Bukowski, actually, but I think his pen name was Charles Bukowski.
Just under the Charles, yeah. It's I love referring to lines in a story having juice.
I think
that's great.
It's pretty relatable, isn't it? You can sort of tell because it's not, he's not talking about orange juice. He's talking about the kind of juices you get on your chin when you bite into a juicy steak.
Yeah,
because it's this big burst of flavour into your mouth that's overflowing.
You want to feel like if you gripped the book, it would bleed story.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, they're so tiny. Like the two books that I own of his are his first and last books. So I've got Post Office and Pulp. Post Office, which he wrote about his experience as a postal worker, and it was the one that catapulted into his life as a writer. And Pulp, which he wrote, it's a pastiche of a detective story that he wrote whilst dying of leukemia.
You've told me about this one before. Yeah. It sounds fantastic from what you told me.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, it opens with him trying to jerk off over the phone to someone's voice, so it's pretty strong.
Oh, that's for anyone listening who, like me, before we started this, the prep for this episode, wasn't really familiar with the work of Charles Bukowski. Buckle in, that's the light shit.
Yeah, pretty much. He's a fairly unrepentant dirty old man. I think he even wrote something called Notes from a Dirty Old Man or something.
Yeah, so that was my first step in.
Oh, really?
And it's filth and it's glorious. It's not often that you get about 10 lines into someone and you go, all right, I'm in. Go, just whatever you want, just do it.
Do it to me.
I guess that's every line has its own juice, its own flavour. It only took a little bit for me to go, all right, yeah, I get it. I get this.
The thing that really strikes me about him, looking back at him now, is how authentic he appears to have been. Because in preparation for this, I listened to a bunch of interviews that he'd done, and he speaks like this. Like, that's how he talks. He doesn't really dress it up for his books. He just talks onto the page. Yeah. And it's not stream of consciousness, but it is his conversation.
There's a
dialogue perhaps.
There's a little prologue to Dirty Old Man where he's talking about when he got a job writing for a paper, and it's where a lot of these stories came from that then later grew into books. And he'd been writing poetry, and he was sick of writing poetry because what happened was you gave them to a publisher, they never went anywhere, and then you'd find lines from your poems in a far more famous poet's work.
Oh, fuck.
And he was like, no, I'm done with that. And then a friend of his, who was a journalist, who had helped make a newspaper really successful, and then didn't like the direction it was taking, left them and became their main rival. But, he said to Chuck, just, whatever, just write stuff. Just write for me. Write what you want to write. And he tried to write by sitting down and making a plan. It didn't work. But as soon as he cracked open a couple of beers, started drinking, and just let words happen.
Yeah.
That's where he said it's easy. When you do that, it's easy and it's never boring.
That's quite fascinating, isn't it? Because wasn't it Hunter S. Thompson, one of the other people that we've done a Write-like episode on, I think he claims that if he didn't have drugs, he would have just been a boring accountant or something. He required this to write. And it's a bit of a strange thing, that, isn't it? They talk about alcohol removing your inhibitions, so maybe they were in their head about it.
Yeah.
very interesting to have to like change your mental state to actually become prolific. But I think a lot of people do it. I did once read a bit about how he drank just an absolute ton of beer and cutty sark whilst writing, which is just, I don't know about you. There's no way I could have more than a couple of like stiff drinks and have anything coherent to put on the page.
I've tried.
Have you?
Yeah, I've definitely tried at points. I've come home and I've thought, I've got a brilliant idea. I'm going to write this down. And then I come back to it in the morning and it is the scrawlings of a madman.
Oh, but that's like after a night out. I mean, like, sit down with an unopened bottle of whiskey
Oh, and work through it
and
as you
open
wrote.
it in order to write. Like, that's just
You get to
really
surprise
alien to
yourself
me.
with your twist ending the next day, don't you, when you read back?
This is
I
pretty
remember,
fucking good.
I remember writing up to here, but wow, this really takes off.
Why? Somewhere in the middle, it becomes some kind of love letter to an old girlfriend. That's really weird.
It's this bit where suddenly these two women in Middle England say, "Well, fuck you, Mr. Beauregard," and shatter the bottle. Oh, that really picks up.
So he once said that heavy drinking is a substitute for companionship, and it's a substitute for suicide. It's a secondary way of life.
Oh yeah, that's
Which, yeah, I mean, we've spoken about some authors before that have killed him. I'm fairly sure we've spoken about Hemingway shooting himself.
yeah.
But he didn't. He died of leukemia, so it's I guess that's the happy ending.
That's a fucking reach, man.
Bit of a reach. But yeah, Bukowski is something else. I didn't encounter him on my degree or through adults that I was around. He's not the kind of writer that someone puts in your hand. I don't think anyone goes like, read that.
It's not Tolkien where you're
No. But like
this.
Yeah, it just, I don't think he's required reading for anything apart from life. Yeah, exactly.
Great minds, man.
But so you've kind of got to be already looking for him. I think you've got to have a bit of a Bukowski-shaped hole that needs that bit of like force of nature. And a little dash of angst, it has to be said. Like, he's quite emotionally driven.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you catch it at just the right time, which I think I did in my sort of early 20s, you get really into his style of writing and immediately try and ape it, and get obsessed with this concept of this drunken writer, which is incredibly unproductive and unprofessional in any other context, and even in this context as well.
Theoretically useful at university, though.
Theoretically useful at university, but I don't know. I think for me, he was more useful as like a counter to the overly literary stuff that I was having to read at the time.
Yeah, I can see that.
He's just so vulgar and raw. It's really intoxicating to read, and his novels are quite short. He writes short stories and poetry. You can absorb a lot of him quite quickly, and it all feels somehow quite poignant, even though it's coming from a man who can't walk straight. Yeah, it's good stuff. So I know he's also got some like bad connections as well. Like, but there's pretty overt sexism in his books, for example. That's very much the personality of the man. Like when he was asked who he lost his virginity to, he said a 300-pound whore, which is pretty aggressive.
Yeah, it's not kind, is it? It's not a kind reflection.
And it's that story is all about him being a 24-year-old virgin, because he wasn't a handsome man and didn't have any money and etc. And so yeah, he misplaces his wallet after the fairly unpleasant lovemaking, right? And immediately accuses her of having stolen it from him, and says a lot of really horrible stuff to her.
Oh no.
Then after she leaves in floods of tears and all the rest of it, he finds it under the bed that they broke.
Oh,
And Chase,
oh.
it doesn't end there. Chases after her, doesn't find her, so goes back to the bar that he found her in. And meanwhile, she's already told the story to these barflies that frequent this bar, and the bartender bans him, so he can't even get in to apologise.
Oh man,
Yeah,
that's awkward.
yeah, it's pretty awkward, isn't it? Anyway,
Yeah.
it's so we're going to attempt to
To see through those goggles.
to put those goggles on, and yeah, give it a bit of a go. I think this but yeah, force of nature, Charles Bukowski. I think.
Well, in that case, like the man himself, let's get to the point. Ben, you're up, and the prompt is more bones.
More bones. It wasn't big enough, I thought, squinting at the bone in my hand. It was necessary that the work had to be done in the dark. Even the dimwits of my tribe would have questions if they saw me pulling it apart and slotting it back together again. Bones the colour of hot piss lay around me, on the rock which jutted out of my cave like a tongue. The moon glowed above the trees, and I knew the fool at the other end of the valley would be working on his bones too. There was a trick to it, like everything else in being a big wise man. You start with the largest bones you can find, and work the smallest ones in as you go. It had been a long time since I'd been able to boil the soupy flesh from a big thick bone, though. The men had stopped dying when the war for the valley ended. My bone totem had grown taller and thicker up until then. The people had stopped sending their women to my cave when they grew tired of the fighting, so I'd stomped out to make peace. The other tribe's big wise man had met me in the middle of the valley, and we danced for each other. I'd waggled my nuts and shaft at him as I leapt and tottered around the clearing, and he'd done the same with his filth-matted man parts. Then we'd spoken. We'd weaved some magic, the two of us, that meant no war could happen in the valley. He didn't return the knowing twinkle of my eye. That made him one of the crazy ones, that actually believed in it all. I was just in it for the ass and the bones, but I couldn't let him know that. So we sealed the deal with an exchange. A little finger from each of us, snatched by a stone axe. Now, my finger was across the valley in his totem, and I kept his in mine. Bone followed bone, and I ate mushrooms to show me the way. I feared it would fall over, but it had to be tall, taller than his. I placed a careful lattice of bones on top of each other, using the skulls to plug the gaps. It had to stretch up over everyone, my big totem of bones. So I built it up and up until it seemed to challenge the night's clouds. I had to drag a log over and stand on it in order to place the final bones. My predecessor's skull went on top, everyone knew that, where he could see what was happening. I tucked the small finger bones of peace between that skull's teeth. The mushrooms eventually laid me out, and I woke up in a tree with too much sun on my face. Someone had put acorns in my ass, probably me. I crapped them out from a great height and climbed down, feeling sore back there. Members of the tribe might come and visit me soon for the blessing of the new moon. I pulled on the stinking furs and antlered helmet I liked to impress them with and waited by my bones. My ass itched from the acorn spurs, but I didn't let myself scratch as the tribe began to arrive. More than I'd anticipated came, some being carried by others. A sickness, I was delighted. On their simple faces, I saw the need to believe, a sweaty fervour that there might be more to their existence than the life they had already lived. I capered and bade them lay the ill folk upon the tongue of rock by my bone totem. The invalids were adults, coughing and wheezing, with sweat all over their bodies. I took my jagged stone I used for cutting meat and sawed their clothes off. One pretty thing had me salivating at the thought of clamping my mouth around her parts when I revealed them. I knew I'd have to wait until dark for that, when the tribe would sleep and leave her in my care. The shapely long limbs of the men and women that the tribe sobbed over sparkled with sweat. All those lovely long bones being wasted inside ribbons of muscle and the shackles of skin. To break a coughing fever is simple enough. You just mix the invalid's blood with some ash and spit, then paste the stuff over their bodies and place them by a roaring fire. Should they die, though, especially with my mushrooms chivying them along. My bone totem would soar. I set to work on chewing up the mushrooms and spitting them in their panting mouths as the tribe watched. All except the woman. Her I wanted to work on some more that night, so I only gave a little dribbling taste from my mouth. One by one as the day wore on, they coughed out their last. I screamed when they died and painted my exposed body with ashen paste, which cracked as I moved. I danced for them, cursing the evil spirits who snatched their breath, my feet pounding out a circle around the bone totem. The tribe were distraught, and their wailing filled me with purpose. I set my cauldron to boil over a crackling fire once they were all dead, and as the water heated, I watched every bead of sweat trickle over the remaining woman's skin. I skillfully jointed the dead with the finger axe and my razor stone. The families watched me throw body parts into the jumping water and begin the process of preparation. It started with a creak as the moon came out. I stared up into its pale face at the noise, and then down at my bone totem. It seemed to shift horribly in the shadows. My stomach lurched as it began to fold over. In a moment, the bones fell with a jangling crash. The big ones bounced away, and the smaller ones scattered over the tongue rock. I was frozen, until the angry shout started. The tribe, in their simple minds, had got the full notion that their big wise man was to blame. His prayers had failed, and their people were dead, they shouted. Those big simple faces which had held desperate faith hours earlier were now twisted into sweating masks of revenge. They seized me and tore my furs from me. One man snatched my antlers and smashed them. A savage pummeling only ended when a high voice called for it. The woman, still naked but no longer coughing, stood and pointed at the cauldron. Her eyes were wide and round from the mushroom taste I had given her. I screamed curses as they dragged me to it. I grabbed onto the sides, my knuckle bones nearly pushing through the skin. My palms and fingers blistered on the hot metal, until one man broke my wrists with a rock. The men dumped me into the scalding water head first. They took care that my skull would be clean and polished for the next big wise man, or, as it turned out, woman.
That was fucking wicked.
I'm glad you like it.
I really do. There's something about his style, right, that you've captured perfectly, which is that there are things that make you laugh even when they're bizarre and horrific because of the way it's told.
Okay, that's fun.
Like, I was still chuckling about someone had put acorns in my ass, probably me, as he was, like, wholesale murdering these young men and planning to rape a woman. Like, that's...
He's a crazy big wise man.
Well, yeah. Oh, God, what a nice conceit as well to have him, like, be a non-believer and in it for the con.
Yeah, he's in it for the ass.
He really likes arse and bones. It's the first thing I have written down on my notes here is just in it for the ass and the bones. What a slogan! You need that on a shirt.
Yeah,
you know, some really lovely things in there. The idea of this man thinking everyone else is crazy and stupid, meanwhile he is a bone hoarder and clearly also a lunatic, a mushroom-addled madman. But yeah, just really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it had a lot of fun writing it.
How did you find that process?
Absolutely fine. I think what we're trying to do here is not write perfect facsimiles of the chosen styles. Like, it's write like, not write exactly,
not right
like,
as,
not create. Yeah, like, so I think the things that I enjoyed were like the moments of explosive vulgarity, the constant obsession with, I think you'd call it like a priapic obsession. Like, he's really into his like tall bone tower, which is a fairly obvious allusion to a dick.
Wait, what?
Yeah, exactly. And this is fairly common in Bukowski's writing, although he normally doesn't veil it as well as I did there. Skillfully veiled it so you didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. Um,
You would have called it his like quivering bone cock or whatever.
I think I think the guy wouldn't have left his cave, and he would have just sat there just jerking off and drinking. um, yeah. So this idea of being obsessed about bones, yeah, it all sort of came from that.
Yeah.
I liked doing a little bit of a turn that this wise man's power is sort of divested and passed on to a woman next. I thought that was like, for me, it's the more uncomfortable bits in Bukowski's writing are his sexism.
Yeah.
So to sort of create like a false caveman society, this imaginary caveman society where they're led by these hokey religious leaders, but at least there's no gender divide.
Yeah.
It's one of the few okay things about this, and of course, she basically orchestrates a lynching.
She burst right through the bone ceiling. It was
Straight through the bone ceiling, cascades of femurs everywhere.
oh, it's all just females and femurs. Your stories, all those lovely long bones being wasted, Ben.
They're just being wasted in people's bodies, man. Like,
yeah, in the shackles of skin. That's
yeah,
I like that.
yeah. I like the idea that, but it's not in that order. The order is ass and then bones.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like he stopped a war because he wanted to get ass again.
It's appeared to be something of a fanny drought. I think an armistice.
But it was this horrible idea that they were just bringing women to his cave because he's the big wise man. Oh, yeah.
Imagine if that sort of things like that were happening in real life, Ben. Wouldn't that be horrible? Oh.
Watches Conan, sadly.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Cries in fantasy literature.
Yeah, so I had a lot of fun with it. Very much not set in a contemporary setting, which is where a lot of his stuff is.
Yeah.
So I haven't aped him there. I think the vulgarity and the way that he talks in the first person, I think I've got a little bit of in here. But I think you can still tell it was written by me, but maybe not in a bad way. So I'm fairly happy with it.
Bad way at all. I think using your ability as a writer and your modern sensibilities to add that twist actually gave the story a level it wouldn't have achieved.
Well, I'm sure he would have found something else if he was.
He would have done a very different thing. I'm not saying it wouldn't have been a good thing, but I'm saying you did something he wouldn't have.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's what keeps this interesting. I think that's why it worked.
Yeah. No, I enjoyed it. He's a fascinating writer to try and interact with, because we've recently looked at Rudyard Kipling, who's the vernacular is incredibly difficult to get the hang of.
Yes.
Whereas you can just be like put some Americanisms and some vulgarity in, and you could get away with like, I think. But it's that tone. We spoke at the start about like getting some flavour in.
Yeah.
And I tried to make every line on its own interesting in some way. Like, I don't think there's any boring lines in there, at least not to me. So hopefully, I think I did achieve what I set out to do, which was to attempt to not write something boring.
I have to disagree. I have to disagree. It was boring. No, I would not disagree. I think that you really did land it.
Well, that's fun. He's Did you read any of his poetry?
I read a couple.
Anything stand out for you?
I'll be honest. No, I did it in a really crappy way, which was I went on his website and you can read them in. They look like they've been scanned from the original typewritten.
Oh, okay.
So I actually had quite a hard time reading it.
Oh, was it like quite grainy?
Yeah, because it was like 3 pixels per word. It was quite difficult to
all over
read.
the place and stuff.
Yeah. So I was getting the kind of flavor of how he writes, and lots of like interesting uses of repetition, and but I don't think I managed to really absorb any of it, unfortunately.
There's one that I listened to a long time ago because there is a recording of him reading it out,
Yeah.
which is really good. It's called "Friendly Advice to a Lot of Young Men," and it is quite fascinating. At the time, I was on a poetry writing module
Yeah.
because I was at uni, and they do these sorts of things there. Yeah, so I was sort of, I wanted to drag in a bit of Bukowski at the time, and I probably like overaped him, I think. But this is the poem that sparked it off for me, which I'm going to read it to you now. I'm going to subject you to it.
I'm ready.
So, Friendly Advice to a Lot of Young Men by Charles Bukowski. Go to Tibet, ride a camel, read the Bible, dye your shoes blue, grow a beard, circle the world in a paper canoe, subscribe to the Saturday Evening Post, chew on the left side of your mouth only, marry a woman with one leg and shave with a straight razor, and carve your name in her arm. Brush your teeth with gasoline, sleep all day and climb trees at night, be a monk and drink buckshot and beer, hold your head underwater and play the violin, do a belly dance before pink candles, kill your dog, run for mayor, live in a barrel, break your head with a hatchet, plant tulips in the rain, but don't write poetry.
I mean, at 32, I might not qualify as someone who can receive that advice anymore, but I feel like I followed some of it.
Yeah, I think you did actually. Yeah.
Oh, I miss my paper canoe. I'm not
You're gonna say you miss your dog.
No, he got the better of me in that fight. Now I'm just waiting for someone who wants to marry a man with one leg. It's really interesting form, isn't it? The way it kind of spirals apart. It starts almost sensible and descends into madness.
Yeah, and it grows. Like the more the stranger things are, the more complicated lines.
Yeah.
There's nothing wasted on it. There's no fat on it. It looks borderline unformatted, written
Yeah.
down. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I really enjoy it.
Shave with a straight razor, marry a woman with one leg, carve your name into her arm.
Yeah, it's pretty fucked up, isn't it?
That's horrendous.
It's fairly horrendous. Yeah, it's. I think this idea of like he's clearly looking for like a permanent, indelible imprint on somebody.
Yeah.
I think he was quite a lonely man. And it with this, this sort of penchant for hyper expression and emotional outpouring, which gets real crazy at times because the things that people think in their head are kind of crazy before they put them through a filter. And we know that he wrote drunk, so that filter was just removed and tossed aside. Good though.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. There's so much. This is what makes people end up being writers you should study, isn't it? When you can talk about it and break it apart, and at the end you do just kind of land on, but it's good though.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he would object to anyone saying that they should study him. Pulp, that last novel of his, is the dedication is to bad writing, which is such an extra thing to do in the book that you're writing as you die, which is a pastiche of the detective genre about death. It's died as he lived, I think. But we're on more bones, so we're gonna have to have your entry, man.
Oh, right. More bones. It was no small thing we were doing, turning so many miles of sodden dirt, shit-smeared swathes of good old American soil into what the politicians' pet wordsmiths would call a new frontier for the modern age. The people suckled at the teat of these tight-collared boy-sniffers as though they starved without it. Mindless, a stiff drink short of an interesting conversation, and lacking the cock and balls to fill a glass to the brim and make something fucking happen. The men around me were prisoners, same as I was. Robbers and killers, hustlers and rapers, hornswogglers and philistines, Sons of bitches and innocent men too deep in the lie. Not that any man could ever be innocent. Men wearing rags that had swaddled more asses than you would want to count, still wearing those sticky stains in front and back of 1,000 other men. You see, they take away the drawers from you, as the elastic could be used to kill a man. Have his eyes bulging and bending and sloshing out to make space for air that he does not have. Should you be so inclined, which many of my present company would be, to indulge in such perverse delights. So you could feel the long-dried jizz streaks that desperate hands had rubbed into the cloth, the coarseness of the material twinned with that of the act, the rough, grunting chorus of indentured men, music to a jailer's ears, the soft sucking of a cheap cigar, less than $5 a box and shared between them all, mimicking a mouth around every stiff cock in the joint. We had found the third heap of bones for the day as we dug like rats into the deep soil. For the month of digging, it was our 23rd. The first skeleton had been shocking, its beads rattling against the long dry bones, now so rudely thrust into the air, an impotent cock into the sodden pussy of nature. Those guards had run at first, no spine in any of them, just bubbling vats of semen masquerading as machismo. We, the digging folk, had cried out. In the mud still was the feathered plumage of the long-dead soul. Now it was dirt and shit and pieces of bird, all of which stuck to the bones. One of the men said that we ought to bury them back, abandon the thing. Well, the drivers were not on for that. Too much money swapping pockets in darkened rooms a lifetime away from here. Men with beautiful broads dangling from their arms and their cocks, and powder whooshed into their brains, and peaty, meaty scotches dribbled on their collars and leaking from their orifices, and tucked between their folds of fat were $100 bills that ought to belong to the men out here digging. Tucked into the folds. They said, dig on, and we were nothing but men already dead. If one of us had fallen in and croaked our last, they'd have piled us up with the skeletons, of which there were now enough to start 2 teams, and I'm sure soon a league of some macabre game. They'd say nothing of a prayer, just take the pants again to let someone else feel the rub of our loads. One fellow was crowing plenty now, what with all the bones we had found. The guy seemed half queer with his jellies quaking like they were, and all folks that could were standing far away from him. "Injuns!" he cried out. "Injuns is what we found here. Now we all got a curse on us." Fucking idiot can't see that the curse is already on us. We're no longer men, we are squint-eyed moles, burrowing and furrowing away, sniffing at the wreck and ruin for a crumb of salvation. That mound of bones ain't cursing us more than we already got cursed. Not a drop of beer has passed my lips in more'n a year. I'm so dry from thirst and lack of a woman I'd welcome crabs now, just for an excuse to have the doctor look at me. She was a fine-looking broad, the doctor at the clink, all nylon-wrapped legs and short dresses. She knew what she was doing, the doc. Wouldn't take the job otherwise. I knew she was taking inches from some of the other lost men, but not mine. I was too short, too white. I could have showed her something, though. Mine crooks to the left. Sure, she's never seen anything like it. I wonder if she's a fine-looking woman, truly, or if it's the starvation that makes me think she is. A man on an island would drink a glass of piss if you told him it was brandy. Lick his lips and thank you, too. "You're blind to it, then. The horror of it all." Maybe I am. I fumbled for a smoke that wasn't there. I could have used a smoke. "Perhaps you're just too stupid, too ugly and small and insincere to understand the power of the world and the universe and spirits and demons." Fuck off, would you? "See, a crass man, a pimple, probably arrested for molesting an infant, a jellyfish, a smear, a boiled egg with no salt, nothing of a man." I was done with politeness. I was a great many things, but not some deranged boy fucker. No rape tarnished my soul. Plenty of other marks, but not that, and least of all from him. Fuck off, I say! He still was whining, the man who believes in a curse. His eyes were wide, like a deer startled by the penetration of a stronger buck. His pick for digging was in the mud. Rain softened it, and its sitting place, too. I imagined it melting down, buried like a stiff rod into an ass. Nothing but a brown mess and a satisfying plop on the way out. Ought to be going elsewhere, I thought. His voice was irritating to me, buzzing like a fly, little wings humming around your ears, like a fly. Where's a rolled-up paper when you need one? I took up his pick before it could be swallowed. What are you doing with that? He asked. I didn't know yet. I was deciding as I did it. More you, I murmured. The words poured out, spilled, uselessly, in a fashion befitting all things spilled among this company. I brung the thing up high in my hand, clumsy, in my left. My right, the good hand, held my own pick. I did not want to dirty it. I brought it down hard and fast on him, popping into the top of his head, clean and quick, like sliding a wallet into a pocket, like bourbon into the belly of any sensible man, raw and twisting and good. Like pieces of eggshell, head cracked in and eye pulled back. Like opening a beer, the whole top came off his head. I watched it slosh and drop into the mud. More mess, more bones. I can hear them shouting at me. Not sure if it's the cocksuckers or the other cursed men, so I go back to digging. I see little bits of the dead man swell around my shoes. They are ruined. They won't go on another pair of feet. Good. Fuck 'em. Miles away, a dollar bill comes loose from its fat-fold grave. Then another. A pair of shoes. A bullet. All expenditure. The only thing that's free is even more bones.
That was fucking great. Like, legitimately fantastic.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it, man.
Yeah, I was completely enthralled. It was so gross, as to actually like transcend grossness and become art.
That is possibly the best compliment I've ever had.
Like, I thought the first time you were talking about the semen crust on the trousers, I thought that's pretty heavy. To mention it like 3 or 4 more times was genius, I would say. The
Deranged genius, perhaps.
the fucking like the bone stuck into the pussy of the earth or something. Oh Jesus Christ! The whole thing. I loved it. I really loved it. It felt like there were 3 voices in there. There was your voice. There was a strong Bukowski element with the way, this like this obsession with libido and
Yeah.
the way of the world and drinking and popping the head off him, like popping the top of his head off like a bottle cap from a beer. Fantastic imagery. And then also, I think there was a little bit Hunter S. Thompson in that. And I don't know how much of that is the voice that you chose to go for. But like, there was a bit of like his madness to it.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's not a bad thing. I think it's fantastic, and possibly shows that doing these right legs, you kind of like you keep stuff.
Oh no, we're stained.
Was now stained by Bukowski. Talking about every time you look, I'm never gonna be able to look at a fucking pick again. I'm gonna think that's a dick.
Everything's a dick. That's the trick.
Everything's a dick, and that's the trick, is it? The trick is everything's a dick. I love it. So many like really nice turns of phrase as well, because I think you got the vulgarity. Yeah, totally. We know that, but you also got the way that it was woven into extremely engaging turns of phrase perfectly. Like it was very good. I stopped remembering the lines because there were too many good lines, and we've had this before. Like you have a real talent of nailing what feels almost like a soundbite like a
Yeah.
real something for a quote. And it was really evident in this story. I really liked it. Like the bit talking about the doctor who's been taking inches from other that that was maybe a paragraph, if that, and you
Yeah.
completely characterized the situation and used it to add more detail to this horrible existence that this chain gang member has.
It was. I think it's interesting that we both. This one's clearly not that far in the past, especially compared to to cave society, as we shall call it. Not cavemen. We had a female leader by the end, so cave people.
Cave people times.
Oh, I haven't heard the phrase caveman times for ages. It feels so like disingenuous, doesn't
It
it?
does, doesn't it? Yeah. Just
Like,
men. Only men lived in cages then. Cages.
there's
Christ,
the
caves.
Triassic, the Jurassic, the Cretaceous, the Ice Age, caveman times.
Yep. That's the scientific term, and I'm sticking to it.
And then it's nothing until the Iron Age, right?
Yeah, I can't remember which came first, the Bronze or the Iron Age.
No, it goes Iron Age, Industrial Revolution, Bronze Age.
The Bronze Age. The Bronze Age is just after the Atomic Era, I think.
Oh yeah, you're right. They split the atom, and then
Or
someone was
possibly.
like, "What's this like kind of reddy brown metal? Can we do anything with this?"
Do you think we could make really bendy shit swords with this?
I mean, I guess if you want.
I remember
Oh
reading a bit about how that was where the military might of the Egyptians came from. They had a superior alloy, so much so it was like it was bronze, like tin and such. That their opponent's swords would bend when they tried to parry.
oh wow!
It's like you're fucked when you try and block something, and your sword bends. Doesn't snap, bends. Gives you a boomerang.
It's there's loads of cool stuff like that, like old Nordic weapons, because they would, in preparation, they would do things like burn bones and mix it
Oh
in with the
shit! They had
metal. It
yeah
had carbon in it,
yeah
so they were making like a primitive steel.
yeah.
So their stuff was just stronger.
That's dank. That's dank. Anyway, we're so off topic.
Oh god, yeah, we are miles away.
Absolutely miles off topic. The idea of chain gangs, cutting a path or something. It's really quite evocative, isn't it? I remember years ago I watched Oh Brother Where Art Thou,
Oh, what film?
which is a great film. And it was impossible not to see your characters in that uniform.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the Indian burial ground that they were just sort of like fairly mindlessly chewing through, that this one guy had actually taken any care to be driven mad by,
Yeah.
because it's human remains and they were just chewing through it. Yeah, I loved it. Really, really liked that story. I thought that was fantastic.
I had a great time writing it, man. Oh, I mean, we spoke a little bit about it, when we were in the process of writing our stories. But it was in listening to some of his stuff. So I read a little bit, but I was listening as I was traveling to and from work, and I just at one point I was like, I have the idea and I have to write this, and that's the best feeling when you're writing a story. When you're like, if I don't start writing this down now, I might lose it, and I cannot let go of the thread. And
Yeah, no, I know the
just
feeling very
best.
well. And it also prompts me to my next bit of Bukowski poetry, which I'm going to read.
Ye gads.
Egads, there's more. Yeah, because it's something that it's something that he'd possibly already identified as well. So let's have a little listen to it. So again, this was Charles Bukowski, and it's So You Want to Be a Writer. To be clear, I'm probably going to only read the first stanza and a half of this. If it doesn't come bursting out of you, in spite of everything, don't do it. Unless it comes unasked out of your heart, and your mind, and your mouth, and your gut, don't do it. If you have to sit for hours staring at your computer screen, or hunched over your typewriter searching for words, don't do it. If you're doing it for money or fame, don't do it. If you're doing it because you want women in your bed, don't do it. If you have to sit there and rewrite it again and again, don't do it. If it's hard work just thinking about doing it, don't do it. If you're trying to write like somebody else, forget about it. If you have to wait for it to roar out of you, then wait patiently. If it never does roar out of you, do something else. Now, there is more to that poem, but I thought that was fairly poignant considering we're doing Write-like episodes.
I felt thoroughly atted there. I was like, yeah, like it bursts out of you and
Yeah, if you're trying to write like somebody, oh, fuck.
bugger. Well, we didn't mention podcasts, so
He did not.
Got
But
you on
he has this
10:30.
idea. I think he has this idea that which is a bit of a myth that I think this particular era of writers propagated, that there's some kind of mystical ability, and we try to demystify writing quite a lot on this pod, and you can do it. I completely disagree with him here. I think he's being pretty harsh. I think he's making a larger point, which I'm obviously reducing the lens of and bastardizing a little bit by only reading a section of the poem.
Yeah.
But just from that bit, it's an outlook, isn't it? It's his way of writing, and I think anyone can write any which way it works for them. So that's where I stick with it. But go on.
I don't think it needs to just apply to the creatives, like to writing or music or art, or like take that approach to everything. If it hurts you even thinking about doing it, then maybe it's just not a thing you should be doing, even if that's going out to the pub or.
Yeah, I think so, but also like there's a self-examination that's completely lacking in his outlook here. It's like, because if you're procrastinating something, maybe take a look at why you're procrastinating about it. You might still need to do it, but you're procrastinating it because of social pressures, because of mental health issues, whatever it is. It's important to this is a man who'd never really tackled root causes of the problems that he had in his life.
Yeah.
And drank heavily in order to overcome it. Like I'm very appreciative of his writing, and I don't want to shit on his memory or anything like that. But like, there's a more enlightened state of being where you can maybe take a look at the reasons why these things are happening for you, and fix it. It's positive, Like, you only get one go at this.
Yeah.
And it should be focused heavily on your enjoyment of your experience of being alive. And if that means writing something, or it means going to the pub, or whatever it is, you should try and make sure that you can do it. So, I disagree with him here, but I think he is a fantastic writer.
Well, I'm going to have to disagree with you, and a word from our sponsor, our corporate overlords. Remember, creativity isn't for you, it's for the other ones. Get back to work.
Green is not a creative colour. That's a deep ref. Okay.
Oh, well, come at me, internet. Let's go.
But I think there's also this concept that possibly he had because we've gone on about how authentic he was, and just also whilst I was reading about him, there were a few contradictory opinions about that this idea of this, force of nature dude, unapologetic, vulgar, was something of like an act for women.
Oh.
Like someone who was quite close to him and ended up editing a bunch of his stuff, and then also publishing like a critical paper of his work. They said that he would, they'd have dinner, and this man's wife and Bukowski were there, and Bukowski would be the man at dinner.
Yeah.
And he would, be hard and tough and witty and all the rest, and kind of spiky a little bit.
Yeah.
And then he would go around on his own another night to see Bukowski, and he'd be a totally different person. Like, just with, when it was just him and another guy. And so I think this is someone who had a lot of problems with well, it's a fucking complete understatement to say he had a lot of problems with women. He wrote a book called Women, and it's got a lot of it in it. Well, it might be Woman actually. I might have got that wrong, but fascinating dude, fascinating.
Yeah,
And I thoroughly enjoyed trying to write like him, despite whatever he fucking says.
so did I. This is one I would do again. Out of all the right likes we've done, this is one
Yeah.
a style I would try to write in again. Possibly taking the Bukowski lens off it a bit.
But I think this would be a particularly fun one for people to have a go at. So if anybody is listening along and having a bit of a writing, even if you're not sharing it with other people, then enjoy it. Have fun with this one, because you can get. It's pretty freeing to just be able to say the most vulgar shit and turn it into some kind of story and concept. So have at it.
And if you send them to us, I think we're obligated to read them no matter how horrible they are. So
yeah, I think so.
Have fun.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?